Welcome to the Thinkydoers podcast. Thinkydoers are those of us drawn to deep work, where thinking is working, but we don't stop there. We're compelled to move the work from insight to idea, through the messy middle, to find courage and confidence to put our thoughts into action. I'm your host, Sarah Labkovich. I'm a strategy coach, a huge goal-setting and attainment nerd, and board-certified health and wellness coach, working at the overlap of work-life well-being. I'm also a Thinkydoer. I'm here to help others find more satisfaction, less frustration, less friction, and more flow in our work. My mission is to help changemakers like you transform our workplaces and world. So let's get started. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Thinkydoers. For some of you listening today, this week might be business as usual. We've got a global listenership, and not everyone is as affected by the U.S. presidential election as some of us are. Some of you might be celebrating the result. For many of us, the shifts in the American political landscape mark a significant change for the business world that we're going to be operating in. You might be reeling with fear or uncertainty about the implications for your life and work, or the uncertainty of the future moving forward. I also know if you're listening to this, you are one of the people who digs in and makes change happen from wherever you sit in whatever environment you find yourself in. Your work of building better systems, more equitable workplaces, and more meaningful and fulfilling careers matters now more than ever. I see you, and you are not alone. In times like this, my instinct is to shift from trying to reach as many people as possible to making my world a little smaller and connecting more closely in more one-on-ones. So over the next few weeks, I'm going to set aside some time to connect one-on-one with leaders and strategic operators like you, who might be developing resilient strategies and contingency plans for your team or organization given disruption in your operating environment. You might be seeking ways to maintain momentum on important initiatives despite fewer resources to work with. You might have to make quick pivots in your strategic plans or goals, and you might just need a little bit of support as we wrap our collective heads around the election outcome. If anything I've said speaks to you, I would really love to connect with anyone that this invitation inspires to reach out, to hear more about what you're facing, and to develop an even greater empathy for the environment that the people listening to this podcast anticipate operating in the months and years to come. I know what headwinds and tailwinds my business is navigating, but I'm not a focus group of one. And for me to do what I do in support of you, I need to hear what's going on in your world. This is not a sales pitch or sales meeting. It is truly just a time to connect. So if you would like to have a one-on-one conversation with me to connect, commune, and share a little bit of what you're wrestling with, check the show notes for this episode. During November of 2024, there will be a link there that you can use to schedule a 30-minute one-on-one with me until they're full. And if the appointment slots fill up, I'll update the show notes and add another way to connect for some support. Remember, your ability to think differently, to see systems clearly enough to figure out how they can be changed and improved, and to envision better ways of working together is a much-needed superpower. Your strategic mindset is a powerful tool for positive change, and we are stronger together. Wishing you clarity and courage, let's get into today's episode. This is the second episode in a row that sits at the intersection of my two professional lives. The one in goal setting and strategy and high performance, and the other in professional motorcycle road racing. So today, we're going to take a deep dive into the mind of professional motorcycle road racer and multi-passionate professional, Jayson Uribe. Beyond Jayson's successful international and U.S. national racing career, Jayson balances roles as a firefighter, business owner, electrical contractor, and fiancé to the amazing Amber. I knew this was going to be a fun conversation with Jay. We work together in the sport, and he's a really talented, really hardworking rider who, frankly, I just really enjoy working with. What makes this conversation so interesting is hearing Jayson talk through his experience of the balance between technical precision and the skills he's learned around emotional awareness and regulation so that he can perform at his best, even under extreme stress. From starting his morning with routines that are meant to set him up for success to his approach to failure and risk management, Jayson shares practical wisdom that applies far beyond the racetrack, offering valuable insights for anyone looking to improve their performance while also maintaining your emotional balance. Now, let's get started. I am so excited to have Jayson Uribe with us today. Jayson is a rider that we met last year. He had an incredible season in Moto America in the National Series, and he agreed to come on the show and talk with me about how his brain works. So that's what we're going to do today. Jayson, I would love for you to just introduce yourself, tell us who you are and what you do.
Hello, my name is Jayson Uribe. I race motorcycles professionally outside of the racing industry. I own my own company, Code 3 Consultations, where we specialize in automotive forensics and just automotive investigations in general. And aside from that, I focus on firefighting or electrical contracting and just a few things here and there, but that's pretty much the gist of my life.
Yeah, you're in good company here. That's why we started with that question is the folks who listen to this podcast have nonlinear careers. The first question is how do you juggle all of that?
I will say it's definitely a busy schedule between my fiance and I. We're always bouncing all around, whether it's US based, Europe, and just having every day scheduled out is pretty much how we live our life, which I love, my fiance loves. And that's just how we thrive as a couple and as individuals.
So one of the reasons I wanted to chat with you is we worked with a lot of riders in our program, and one of the things that Chris and I noticed right away working with you is how technical you are. Some riders are more emotional and operate based more on feel. Some guys and gals have a more technical feel and ability to describe what's happening in a way that's less emotional. And you're just such a good balance of the two. It makes you fun to work with for us. But I'd love to hear a little bit about that for you. Did you train that emotion, technical mental balance, or were you just born that way?
As far as the emotion and technicality goes, that was definitely something that I was taught, something that I learned over a very long period of time from a variety of different people, whether it's been coaches, personal friends, family members. My fiance has taught me a lot about just being more, I don't know if accountable is the right way to say it, but being able to remove myself from a situation and try and take out the emotional side and focus more on the facts. This is what's happening, and there's something I can do about it. Great. If there's not, then I need to find a different solution. So being able to take in all the information I can has helped me grow a lot, not only in my personal life, but more in my business life with my company, with racing, as far as being able to dissect something that's happening, whether it's in a technical platform or whether it's more of, hey, this is what I feel like. I'm on this bike and man, I'm just struggling because of X, Y, and Z. And that's something that I really strive to be good at. And I try my best every time I get on a motorcycle to use that and leverage it.
For me as a team owner, that's good to hear because it means it can be learned. So, which is just really encouraging. We talked about nonlinear careers and people who are multi-passionate. It seems like in your work, you get to practice mindfulness. You're not just reacting to your emotions, but you're noticing what's happening and then making more conscious decisions about how you handle those inputs. What do you learn from practicing that in so many different disciplines?
There are a few different levels as far as how I approach different scenarios, whether I'm with firefighting or whether I'm focusing more on racing a motorcycle, driving a car, anything like that. I feel like the level of intensity as far as my mind goes varies, and I'm just trying my best to find the best path for what I need. For example, if I'm leading a crew into a burning house, my stress level is up here, but my focus level is through the roof. So being able to almost hyper focus on this is exactly what I need to do. These are the variables I have. This is what I can control. This is what I can't control. And trying to minimize the stuff I can't control, maximize the stuff I can, and just find that balance of at some point, things are going to happen that I can't control and I have to be able to adapt to it. So it's, Yeah, like I was saying, different level of execution, but the same basic fundamentals, no matter whether it's firefighting or racing.
I shouldn't assume that everyone knows what we're talking about. I just jumped in because we race. Can you tell our listeners who might not be familiar with road racing what you do when it comes to motorcycles?
When it comes to road racing, just racing a motorcycle in general, my job as the rider is to obviously perform on the racetrack. When it counts, winning is awesome, and winning is what gets sponsors. That's what brings back money for everybody. If I'm not able to win, I'm not doing my job. So, where I try my best to make sure I'm the best rider possible is with physical fitness, making sure I'm physically able to do the tasks that I need to do, mental strength, mental stamina, being able to not only withstand pressure from my opponents, pressure from sponsors. There's always some sort of pressure. You don't just show up to a race and just, here you go, do your best. At some point, you're showing up to do a job, and that's what you're there to do. So being able to maximize that pressure and be able to not only thrive on it, but excel is something that I'm really trying to get better at every time I go to a racetrack. Outside of that, it's just a lot of trying new things. I think that's something I've learned, especially over the last year, is not getting so stuck in one way of riding a motorcycle. That's something I've definitely been guilty of doing in the past, and trying to be open minded as a motorcycle racer should be and adapt to the environment around me and not just get stuck in one path.
That leads me to curiosity about goal setting. You mentioned you go out there to win races, but you also mentioned you do a lot of preparation, physical fitness, mental fitness. Do you have any kind of structured approach to goal setting, or how do you set goals?
When I'm trying to set goals, it's really hard for me to be able to set a realistic goal until I get into whatever situation I'm getting into. For example, this year when I was racing in the Moto America Superstock Championship and I first hopped on the BMW that I was racing, I knew that it would be competitive, but I didn't know where we're going to land. I figured that if we're in the top 10, great. And that was my goal, was top 10, be up there, be capable of getting on the podium, but just see how it played out. And then as we got through the year, as I actually got to the first race weekend, I changed that goal as far as, okay, now we should be in the top 5. And then after I got on the podium for the first time, it was now I should be winning races. Like if I'm not on the podium at least, something's wrong. So I would like to say it's hard for me to set one goal and not move it. I feel like I'm trying to constantly set the bar a little bit higher, not only to be motivated personally to continue pushing, continue trying, but more as a personal fulfillment kind of deal. Like I don't want to get to level 3, for example, and be okay with myself being there. I want to always be pushing and pushing for our next step.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because in racing, everyone's goal is to win. We don't do this unless we're trying to win.
Yeah.
It's too risky. And like,
Mhm.
why would any of us subject ourselves to this kind of risk if we're not trying to win? But it is a building process, something I'm endlessly curious about because I am a rider, but I'm not a high performance rider by any stretch of the imagination. My place is in the garage and in the pit. What happens in your brain when you are actually in a race scenario on track on the bike?
It's funny you bring that up. We were actually just talking about this at American Super Camp where I was just working the last weekend. And all the riders that I was with all kind of came to the same conclusion as the best races are the ones you don't remember. When you're riding the bike, you're almost so focused that everything else is a blur and you don't really have a whole lot of thoughts. You're so focused on the task at hand. And for me, a good example of that was the first race at New Jersey, the last race of the year, or last round of the year, I should say, but the first race of the weekend. It was one of those races where I started from eighth. I didn't do myself any favors in qualifying. I qualified really bad. And I knew I had a lot of work ahead of me. And as the green flag dropped, I just started counting off laps. And I was just trying to focus on one thing at a time, just this corner, the next corner. And what we were saying earlier, it was all just a blur. And before I knew it, I was on the last lap of the race. It just went by. And it was one of those moments I look back on and I'm like, you know what? I really want to try and achieve that again. I want to keep getting back to that mental state or just clicking off and we're making progress. So that's my goal.
When you describe that, I hear flow. I
Mm.
hear the psychological state of flow. It's a pretty extreme form of it. I don't even remember at the end of the race, or you're so in the flow that the voices aren't talking to you
Correct.
when you're out there.
Mhm.
It's wild. Do you notice anything that helps you get into that state, or does it just happens when it happens?
I would say what helps me hyper focus or get into that flow state, like you were saying. Usually, I find myself in that situation when I'm extremely motivated, which obviously I try to always be motivated to do the best I can do. But every once in a while, there's that circumstance, there's that situation that comes along of, hey, if you win this race, you can win the championship. Or, hey, if you don't win this race, you are out of a ride next year. And just like you have those exceptional circumstances. That is usually what really gets me
Mm.
into that state of mind. There are definitely times like bad races where I look back and I'm like, man, that it was one of those races I could have been. And for X, Y, and Z reason, whether it was myself personally or whether it was something involved with the machine I was riding or the racing situation or whatever, there's definitely those I think about. It's something that I don't know if haunts me is the right way to say it, but
Mhm.
one of those things I think about in bed. And you just stare at the ceiling and you're like, man, I try and use that as motivation to help me get back into that slow state.
That rumination is really common. There's the healthy analysis and learning, and then noticing when it's moving past the healthy analysis and learning and figuring out how to change that mental channel. Do you have any practices for gearing yourself up pre-race for high performance?
One of the things that I started doing back in 2016, more or less, was just trying to go for a morning jog or just some kind of activity to get my heart rate up, get the blood pressure going a little bit, and just try and get out some of those nerves, try and get some of the adrenaline out in a healthy way. Being able to try and relax a little bit, obviously not physically, but more mentally, like giving my body a chance to go for a few minutes helps me stay calm, especially if I'm about to go into a big race or something that's really important. Aside from that, getting a good night's sleep. If I am able to get to bed early, have a decent night's sleep, and have a decent breakfast, for me at least, makes a big difference. So I try and make sure I set myself up for success whenever I can.
That routine that you put together, there's a lot of science behind what you just described
Mhm.
to set yourself up for high performance, even down to going for a run. Any kind of bipedal movement has impacts on our brains. And then those of us who ride, people think of us as adrenaline junkies. And what I find is we're the polar opposite. Like if you or I experiences adrenaline, something is going wrong. How do you have to wind yourself back down after a race?
A lot of it is situation dependent. If I have a good race and I am able to get in somewhere of that flow state, I come off the bike and I'm good. I'm ready to
Mm.
jump right back on the bike or just go grab dinner with the crew. And the races where I really struggle, whether it's physically, mentally, whatever it might be, those are the races I come off the bike and I'm mad. And I'm not
Mm.
necessarily mad at anybody in particular. It's more just I knew that it was one of those opportunities I had that I let go, and that really bothers me. At the same time, I've learned that the more I ruminate on that, the more I let that marinate, the worse I become, whether it's just with
Mm.
my personal attitude or it's actually with my performance. So I try and have that whole 5 minutes of silence, whether it's on the bike in part as I'm taking my gear off, whatever it might be, that helps me a lot. And I think it's something that I tried to show that to other riders, especially younger riders as they're coming up. But at the end of the day, works for some, doesn't work for others. And it's what works for me.
I think it's okay to come off the bike passionate. It is part of it, doing what you guys do. You wouldn't do it if you weren't passionate about it. What role has failure played in the development of your career? What have you learned from setbacks?
I would say that the failures, the setbacks, the missed opportunities, whatever it might be, are what have driven me the most to achieve success. And maybe a better way to say that is to be willing to try. to achieve success. Being able to jump through that door, so to say, of an opportunity and maybe not really knowing where it's going to lead, but having the motivation to do it anyway. There's always going to be failures. There's always going to be setbacks. You can't predict the future and you can't win every time. So being able to learn from those mistakes, learn from those missed opportunities, and use it for the betterment of your future is something I really try and focus on. It's easier said than done, but it's, again, as far as ruminating, something that I find myself doing a lot. I've been really trying to get better at not letting it get to me. And I feel like I've done a pretty good job as I've grown up to not let it affect me in an adverse way. But it would get to the point where I'd start getting so motivated. Like, man, I'm going to go
Mm.
for a 6 mile run at 3 a.m. As I've gotten older and as I've learned more, I've really tried to mediate and find that middle ground, but I'm still working on that.
I went into the sport because I love motorcycle racing. I didn't go into the sport to come out saying, here's what I've learned from my career in motorcycle racing.
Sushi.
But one of the side effects that I have found so valuable is seeing the persistence in every human being we work with out there, from the riders to the folks who schlep the tires. All we do in this sport is try hard enough that we perform at the very limit of high performance without failure. And then failure is an inevitable consequence because we're always riding that line. And
Mhm.
the tolerance for crew is way lower than the tolerance for riders. But you guys' job is to go out there and get as close to that line as humanly possible. Do you recognize that failure tolerance, or are you more just focused on the flip side of focusing on getting better to win?
As I've gotten older, I have realized that risk mitigation is a huge part of my decision making process, whether it's with firefighting, whether it's with my company, whether it's with racing, especially in racing. Being able to recognize that, okay, like you said, this is the limit. The limit's here. And how close am I willing to get to that limit? Is it something where I've crashed the bike 10 times this weekend already? If the limit's here, I need to take it easy. Or, hey, maybe I need every single percent. And I'm in a situation where the limit's here. I need to be neck and neck and flirting with the limit every time I can. That's a conscious decision that I usually try and make before I actually go out onto the track, while I'm sitting in pit lane, in the paddock, wherever I might be staged on the motorcycle. Is one of those things I try and do, as far as taking that breath, finding that Zen moment, and making that decision of, this is my job. This is what I have to do. And whether I achieve that or not, that's where I try and get better as an actual rider, as a human being. But that's always been my goal.
Just thinking about the season that you had and knowing your performance in your races, it's wild to think about you sitting there in the pit before you head out making the decision, because you had some pretty wild races once you were on the track this season. So how do you handle when things don't go to plan in the moment, when you're in that extreme of a situation?
That's been a learned skill. I would call it a skill, as far as being able to have something go wrong, have something not go to plan, and being able to move on. For example, when I was younger, when I was growing up racing, if I had a moment in a corner where I might have lost the front tire, or I might have almost crashed on the exit, or something happened I wasn't planning for, and it would really get to my head. And the whole next 5 minutes or so, I'd be trying to just come down off of that high. As I've gotten older, as I've worked with some really cool people, some really smart people, being able to have a moment like that where it's like, oh my gosh, I almost just crashed, back into the moment, is something that I'm always trying to get better at doing. I'm actively trying to get better and grow in that perspective. I think the more I try, maybe that's not a great example of failure like you're asking, but it's just one of those things. That's the same approach I try to failure, whether it's on or off track, is, hey, this happened. We got to focus over here right now. Yeah, it sucked and it was a bummer, but this is the future. This is what I can actually control. I can't do anything about the past.
It's so cool because I think that is what inspires me so much as a team owner. It's not always fun, but what keeps me engaged is the daily reminder when we're out there that if you don't try, you never get to P1. If we're not out there trying, we're never going to get on the top of the box. You're never going to win the championship. It sounds like you've worked with some sports psychologists or some folks who have that kind of specialized experience because that recovery after an incident, it is so cool to hear you speak about that being learnable. Our reactions are chemical. Like there is an element of chemistry that you can't control, but then your behavior, you ultimately can learn how to make decisions consciously about your behavior, even when your chemistry is firing. We learn from sports psychology, but also I'm sure you learn it in your firefighting career too, that there are times you have to consciously manage your chemistry. It's so wild. I mean, I know the science of it, and I coach that skill for people in not death-defying scenarios. When we have stress in a workplace or when we have stress in a other kind of performance relationship where lives aren't on the line, then folks can learn to notice and slow down and take that breath and get themselves regulated to get back to performance. But just thinking about how rapid fire and the kind of life and death scenarios that you work in is amazing.
Whether it's at the racetrack or whether it's with my crew, whether it's with my station, I think when you get to a high level of anything, whether it's a sport, whether it's in a business, whether it's swimming, something that is totally unrelated to anything necessarily high risk, it takes that same level of dedication and that same level of acceptance as far as I'm trying to be number one. I'm trying to be the best of the best. And to do that takes X, Y, and Z. And making that conscious decision of, okay, whatever I have to do to get that X, Y, and Z, I'm going to do. That to me is a mental switch that anybody can do. Granted,
Mm.
some people that just are gifted and have ungodly amounts of natural talent, that's awesome. Might be easier for them than the next guy or the next gal or whoever. But being able to make that choice and saying, I'm going to do it anyway, is something that I always try and preach. And it's something that I use myself in racing.
Some of our listeners probably are never going to sit on a motorcycle, but what you're talking about can be applied to whatever performance endeavor people want to choose to take on and not be afraid to fail at because they want to try it or they're motivated to see if they can get better. Do you have any advice that you'd give to other people who are looking to cultivate that ability to be technical in emotional environments or when performance really matters?
I think the best piece of advice that I have ever gotten personally, and it's something that I try and teach to people that I work with, is going fast on a motorcycle or doing well at business or doing well at school, especially. That was a big one for me when I was growing up, was to be the best. You don't have to do anything special. You're not chasing a magic bullet. You're not making a special breakfast or a special dinner or wearing a special sock. There's no like secret sauce. It's just perfect execution of fundamentals under stress. And the more perfect the execution, the better the outcome will be. So being able to keep that mindset and take it to everything that I do, whether it's racing, firefighting, electrical, whatever it might be, just knowing that at the end of the day, if I stick to the basics and I get really, really freaking good at them, you're going to be set up for success.
That's so cool, Jason. Is there anything I didn't ask you that I should have or that you'd like to share?
Ooh, that's a good question. The only thing that I would add on would be in firefighting, you never really know what you're going to find. Whether you're walking into a burning building, whether you're approaching a crashed car, whether you're going to a burning forest fire, whatever it might be, you never really know. And you try your best to train and prepare and just have that mental strength to not falter. And sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's really hard. And what makes a good firefighter, what makes a good leader, I guess is the best way to say it, is being able to remain calm in those stressful situations. And that's something that I try and take to racing, especially. And I've learned so much in the last 5 years of me being in the fire department that I've brought over to different aspects of my life, as far as simple things like if you're going to talk on the radio, you got to be smooth, you got to be calm. Like you can't have somebody on the radio hyping everybody else up and getting crazy. So doing things like that, I bring that to the racing department as far as if I get off the bike and I'm screaming and yelling that this sucks, this guy sucks, da 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 da, that helps nobody. So being able to remove the emotional side of things, and there might be so much stuff going on in your head, but you got to lock into the moment of what you are there to do. That's something that I'm trying to get better at. I'm always learning more and more. And that's, again, something that I try and teach others, whether they're kiddos, whether they're adults, whoever. I think it's a really valuable skill that I didn't learn until I was really in the fire department. So I'm trying to push that out to more people as well.
When I listen to you talk about that, I think a lot of the folks who come up in racing come up as wonderkins. It's like really talented, supernatural. Your natural talent or your high potential is what gets you your early rides and gets you into the programs and helps you develop your career. But that isn't necessarily how you learn to work really effectively with other people.
Mhm.
And as much as racing motorcycles comes down to you on the bike, on the track during the race, it is a team sport and it does matter how people work together. So I think that you've had that experience in firefighting has developed a set of skills that not everybody who's out there has, but everybody could. Everybody could find some way to
Exactly.
develop that set of skills. Where can people find you if they want to hear more about any of the various work that you do or if they want to connect?
Yeah, social media would probably be the best way to get a hold of me, whether it's Instagram, Jayson36 Uribe, or just Facebook. My website tells you more about my actual company, code3consultations.com. And aside from that, I'm always hanging out with Sarah and Chris at the racetrack. So just come over and see what's up.
Awesome. Jayson, I am so grateful that you were able to make time to join me for this conversation. I hope I see you next week. Thank you so much, Jay. It's been great to see you, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, friends, that's it for this week. Don't forget, check out the show notes if you want to snap up one of those opportunities to connect with me one-on-one. You'll find links for how to connect with Jay if you're interested in the show notes. If you're a business owner or you manage a marketing budget and you'd like to hear more about sponsorship in the surprisingly economical to sponsor professional sport of motorcycle road racing, I'd love to hear from you. In that part of my life, you can reach me at sarah@cwmoto.com to learn more about working with our team in the professional motorcycle paddock here in the States. If you're interested in sponsoring a rider, Jay is one of the ones I can personally recommend, so you'll find his information in the show notes as well. All right, friends, that's it for today. Stay in the loop with everything going on around here by visiting findrc.co/newsletter and joining my mailing list. Got questions? My email addresses are too hard to spell, so visit findrc.co/contact and shoot me a note that way. You'll also find me at Sarah Lobkovich on most of your favorite social media platforms. For today's show notes, visit findrc.co/Thinkydoers. If there's someone you'd like featured on this podcast, drop me a note. And if other Thinkydoers who'd benefit from this episode, please share. Your referrals, your word of mouth, and your reviews are much appreciated. I'm looking forward to the questions this episode sparks for you, and I look forward to seeing you next time.